Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tracy Vergro. I'm the Executive Director for Strategy and Innovation here at the Solicitors Regulation Authority. We're very glad you could join us for this session at the Compliance Conference, which is a fascinating look at compliance through the lens of innovation and technology. Hello, good afternoon,
Obviously, as a
everybody.
regulator, we're very keen to
My
be
name is
seen to be
Tracy Vergro.
stimulating
I'm
and
the
supporting the
Executive
adoption
Director
of
for
law
Strategy and
tech, legal
Innovation here at the
regulation,
Solicitors Regulation
technologies,
Authority.
new approaches and innovation generally. But we're very mindful that from a compliance perspective, people often look at these things through the lens of risk, understanding what's required, being clear on regulations and what is and isn't acceptable, getting early warning and early steers about things. So we really want this session to be one that is innovative in how we are looking at what we do going forward with innovation at the SRA. And to that end, we've got a very interesting panel joining us. I'm not going to introduce them quite yet because we're going to hear from them in a little while for them to introduce themselves. But I thought I should just give a few outlines of what's going to happen today. It's going to be, as I say, an interactive session. You've already submitted us lots of questions, and we're going to try and answer as many of those as we can. But you're also able to submit questions through the YouTube comments box. They're then going to come through to us and be moderated, and we'll also get round to then asking some of those questions this afternoon. So we'll have a mix of pre-submitted questions and ones that come up live on our chat. The other thing I wanted to remind everyone, this is being recorded. So if you've registered for the session but you can't stay on for the whole hour, you will be able to pick it up later on YouTube. I just ask that you bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. So far, it's all been going well, but every panelist has the ability to log back into the session if there's any blips. So if there are, I do apologise in advance and bear with us. As I say, I'm going to get round to the panelists very shortly, but I just thought I'd give you a little bit of background on my role here at the SRA. So I'm the Executive Director for Strategy and Innovation, and that is a fairly new role, coinciding with our new corporate strategy, which was published only recently, that has an objective around us making sure that we're at the forefront of adoption of legal technology and new innovation. There are a lot of reasons for that. I think people talk a lot about law tech, but not necessarily unpack quite what that means. And in an area that's important for us to understand from a risk and compliance perspective, we don't want to run before we can walk as a regulator. We want to be sure that we're making progress and taking people with us, and that the theory and the skills and ability of people to comply through using technology and new approaches is real. So we don't want people to feel that they are doing something they don't understand, or that we as a regulator are not supporting. We're really mindful that COVID-19 and the terrible issues that the pandemic's raised for society has actually possibly helped bring forward thinking in relation to adoption of technology. And one of our panelists today is actually a virtual firm, essentially. And that's an interesting concept going forward for how the sector might choose to structure itself. We're also mindful that parallels in compliance from different sectors. I personally came from a financial services regulator, and so looking at how audit is enabled through technology and the use of AI was something I was very involved in. That might come up in discussion today. Also very mindful that practical questions come up an awful lot, and are we, through our SRA Innovate space, doing enough and dealing with your questions in the right way? So that's something you might also want to give a perspective on. What more do you want to see from all of us as the regulator? On every level, any points that come up today, we are going to have a sort of resources page around this session of the conference. So again, if we don't get around to all the questions, we're going to try and put up some of the more frequently asked ones, and then you'll be able to sort of check in on that. And again, if that stimulates more questions, we hope that'll keep the dialogue with us going. So we want to, as it were, use tech to also improve the service offering that we have as the regulator, and be mindful of continuing conversations in different ways and in different groupings.
Anyway, that's broadly the session today. And really, I wanted to get into very quickly introducing our panelists. As I say, we chose panelists to try and cover a range of issues. And first, I want to ask April Brusso to introduce herself. April is currently got the most fantastic job title, Global Lead at Clifford Chance Create. And she's head of the firm's innovation practice. I think it's fair to say she's got a passion for helping through business innovation and change, and she's possibly at the zealot end of the spectrum. But we're very interested to hear from April. And I'm going to ask her to speak now for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll go the rounds with the other panelists. So, April, if I may, could you introduce yourself to us?
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everyone. My name's April Brusso, and I am currently working at Clifford Chance. I have a particularly unique perspective on the pandemic and working because I started my role during the pandemic. So have actually been at home and met almost all of my colleagues virtually only. I haven't met most of them in person, maybe 3 people. So it's been a really interesting experience. I'm really interested in the topic we're discussing today because by my background, I've had experience across a number of different functions which touched on compliance and risk quite a bit. So after practicing for a number of years, I moved into knowledge and then moved over here to the UK from Canada, where I worked in a role that I ultimately ended up reporting into the global head of compliance because so much of the work I was doing in innovation and technology was touching on regulatory aspects. And so it became really clear the fundamental role that the regulators can play in sort of helping to move things through the pipeline, so to speak, and also just the role that risk and business risk have to play in successful execution of innovative ideas. At Clifford Chance, the function that I lead is called Create, and it is one of 3 pillars of our innovation strategy. We have 2 other pillars that are equally important. One is called Best Delivery, and that focuses on improving the way we deliver legal services today. Another is called Applied Solutions, and it focuses on digital products that can be sold to clients at scale. And then Create, which is my function, is really looking to the future, and its focuses on research and development and collaborating both with clients but also with the wider community to try to find solutions to problems we haven't even articulated yet. So really forward looking and trying to understand where might we go and how are we going to get there. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us, April. We really got lots of questions that I think you're going to be great at helping us work through. I'm going to move next, if I may, to Shaq Ashraf, who's MD of Forte Markets. I was really interested that Shaq describes himself as an avid entrepreneur and is really committed through looking at parallels in fintech. He's a sort of person that is here to help with compliance and how people understand the rules and so on, and actually business solutions through enabling people to upskill, and so it's sort of demystifying and so on. So Shaq, may I ask you to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for having me. Hi everyone, good afternoon. So MD of Forte Markets. I've been in the regulatory space for my sins for almost 20 years now. So I'll be bringing a view that is finance and banking and a more mature regulatory landscape and comparing that to what's happening in the legal space with also a strong technology view. You know, I've been involved in transformation and complex divestment projects and setting up 3 lines of defense across various types of firms over the last 10 to 20 years. In addition to that, you know, we're doing a lot of exciting stuff at the moment in the knowledge space, because we know one of the challenges that we all have, and especially the legal industry, is the awareness and understanding of technology is preventing a wider adoption of such tools, and hopefully we can discuss and tackle that here, or part of it. And in addition to that, there's a global view. You know, my view is that we're far too siloed on local kind of jurisdictions and ecosystems, and part of the view of disruptive technology or this disruptive era should be looking at a global ecosystem, looking at what our peers are doing in other jurisdictions. So I can hopefully bring some insights into that because we have a global view, and lots of fun really to talk about, and hopefully we can help you in immediate kind of ideas on tools and ways to progress and add value to your roles and to your firms, and also highlight some of the challenges we see today and that are upcoming, because you're in an industry that's literally being turned on its head. 5 years ago, I gave a fintech session to a room full of lawyers, and they weren't happy that there was a technologist or training them. But now when it happens, it's a different ballgame. People are beginning to realize how critical technology is to some of the more kind of attractive functions of law. So glad to be here and hopefully share some good insights. Back to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Shaq. Thank you very much. I think it is interesting. This global comparisons is something that's come up in a lot of questions. What are we learning from other jurisdictions? So I'm sure we'll get around to discussing that. If I may, I now want to get Amy Bell, MD of Teal Compliance, to introduce herself. Again, we're very fortunate to have Amy, absolute advocate of how compliance can be undertaken. She helps lots of firms, and her aim is really to make sure that people understand compliance and risk and actually manage it in a way that is easier, not harder, because they have got her and embracing technology. So Amy, if I may.
Thank you, Tracy, and hello to everybody. I'm really delighted to be invited to this session. If you've already met me before, you probably met me talking about compliance in a wider sense, or potentially more specifically anti-money laundering. But most of you probably know that I am a solicitor. I'm a last century qualified solicitor, so I've been doing it a little while now. And throughout my career, really, technology has played a massive part. It is true to say that in the first firm that I worked, we did have typewriters, but we also had email addresses. We were quite forward in that sense. We used to do kind of bulk process work, so we were introduced to case management quite early on. And it's very rare these days that I go into a law firm that hasn't got technology to help them manage their cases. But what you might not know about me is that I'm also a co-founder of a technology company called Teal Legal. And Teal Legal is co-founded with myself and my business partner, a lady called Sally Holdway, who's a former conveyancer. And both of us very focused on innovation. The last two roles that Sally's had have been innovation roles. And we look in that company to develop solutions that improve the client journey, and reduce risk, because after all, that's what we're here for. We're there to provide clients with solutions in a way that is helpful. And if a risk or a compliance issue crystallizes, we're probably making things a bit worse for the client than they were expecting. So really that business is focused on creating solutions that do the heavy lifting, really. They examine the legal process and think, where can we get the tech to do the heavy lifting? So at the moment, we focus quite heavily on conveyancing, but we also are focusing on risk. And I think we'll get into it during the session. But I think there are massive opportunities for us to not just use the technology that is coming out and new technology, but really leverage the technology we've already got sat in our offices and on our systems to help manage risk. That's a really big theme for me. How do we use that data to help us work out where we need to spend more time and energy on risk, rather than I'm sure all of our delegates today will be aware with the kind of needle in a haystack job of trying to detect risk in law firms through file review or supervision. But I think there's really great opportunities to leverage that tech in a way that just makes things a lot easier for us in compliance.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you. And now our fourth panelist. So Talia Woollett is, I thought, fascinating in how you are operating currently in your firm. So Parkinson Woollett, I think, is a small lean firm, two-partner firm, and specialises in property disputes. Fairly recently founded in sort of 2018, but fascinating to how it is operating currently. And in a world where we've all just lived through COVID, to be a sort of paperless, completely technologically driven model, we thought would be very interesting in terms of understanding the whys and the way you manage risks in your firm. So Talia, if I could ask you to introduce a bit more about yourself.
Hi there, I'm Talia Willett, as Tracy said, in a small two-partner boutique firm, and I'm here to talk about my personal experience of implementing legal tech in the firm. Prior to setting up, I had a fair knowledge of the different approaches to legal tech. I'd worked in large city firms which had made a significant investment into legal tech, a smaller regional commercial firm which was maybe a little behind the curve in that respect. And my husband was also in the legal innovation space at LexisNexis for over 20 years, and then worked in an AI company with large law firms. So I had some knowledge of what was out there and the range of approaches. And when we set up, we knew that we wanted to offer something that was very agile, dynamic. We wanted to focus on tech in order to streamline our approach and reduce the burden on fee earners for non-fee earning work. So we did a lot of work. We took quite a lot of time to look around at what was in the market, look at what was available in terms of legal tech. We looked at locally hosted solutions as well as cloud-based solutions. And in the end, we opted for a sort of a range of software as a solution applications. And we've ended up with something where our bank account links to our accounting application, which links to our practice management system, and all three talk to each other and automatically reconcile. So it just removes a real time constraint that maybe some other firms have. And it absolutely wasn't straightforward to set up that system. We had to be really, really clear about what our compliance obligations were, which weren't easy, and then we had to try and relay those to some of the providers who were just coming into that space, and we actually had to sort of individually negotiate terms, etc. And we had to become real experts in what it was we were trying to achieve. And there were certainly a lot of compliance issues, which I'm sure we will end up touching on today. But what we've ended up with after that sort of difficult first period is an extremely lean operation. We operate entirely without support staff. We have no accounts function or no accounts staff. We're entirely paperless. And we aren't actually a virtual firm. We still have, we are a traditional firm in that we still have premises. We still operate a predominantly face-to-face service. But we do so sort of using technology, heavily based on technology to streamline ourselves and to keep our overheads at a sort of maximum low. And I think what's quite interesting for me and for me and my other partners is that the corona kind of epidemic has forced other firms to quickly think about how tech is working for them in the current environment to enable them to carry on working. And what's that meaning is that firms are having to do very rapid, sudden decision making in order to implement tech to sort of keep them going. But some of the issues that we found sort of a few years ago around compliance and data control, etc., I think are still there and haven't really moved on. And I think what's interesting is people are now sort of approaching firms like us in order to do a sort of rapid information grab so they can do a bit of a back of a fag packet, cost risk analysis as to whether they can implement this tech quickly, but what are the problems and the risks, etc. So it's interesting also that everyone is suddenly in the same space, from the big firms who have a lot of investment, but they've suddenly got, John who's sat at home without a printer, etc., working from his home office, to the sort of smaller firms that haven't really embraced the idea of legal tech, but are now having to. So suddenly everyone's in the same space, and the conversation is quite exciting, I think.
Thank you so much, Talia. Well, look, thank you so much to all our panelists. I hope you can appreciate how we've tried to cover off different aspects to this topic, because there is no one solution. And we're very conscious as the regulator in looking at tech and compliance that we don't want to stifle ideas and innovation that might actually prove to be very cost effective or very simple. And so it's a difficult path that we have to tread in terms of stimulating and encouraging, but not in any way misleading people or lending support to something that may just simply not work from an ethical or a compliance perspective. The main objective for the next sort of 40 minutes or so of discussion is to really try and understand whether there more needs to be done from a sort of an awareness perspective, whether there should be more of a sort of framework that we, the SRA, set out, or if there are issues around
brokering or putting people in touch with different players in this field. That might be something that we take away too. But as I say, we have a mass of questions. I'm going to try and theme them a little bit, but the intros lead very, very nicely into my first one, which I think I'll put to you first, if I may, April, which is the nub of innovation and tech. How on earth does it engage with compliance and risk right at the very start? And how do you get beyond this sort of it's someone else's issue? So how do you make it a holistic thing within an organization?
Yeah, I think that's really important because you do tend to see, and I've seen in the different firms I've worked at, the different functions operating as silos, and a perception that you don't call compliance until you need to complete like your data privacy impact assessment, or you need someone to review the contract. And that's not very effective because compliance then can't do their job well because they don't have the context about the problem to be solved. And it feels very much like I'm passing the ball to you. Now you run with it for a little while, but you don't really get to make any decisions. And so what we've done at Clifford Chance that has proven to be really effective is we have like a small committee of people who do the initial assessment of all ideas that come in. So when an idea comes in, I do a rapid assessment of its sort of criteria, including its desirability, its viability, and its feasibility. And I put a recommendation about who should take it forward to a committee that includes people from knowledge, technology, innovation, marketing, and compliance. And so compliance can see from the beginning, well, what is the problem to be solved? Why are they targeting this? They can give their views on their experience, both as an individual professional and as a team, and what they see across the firm, but also things for us to consider from the outset. And then we put in stage gate criteria throughout the execution of an idea that includes compliance as a key stakeholder consulted at every stage, whether they have a decision-making role in that stage or they actually have something to do or not, just to keep them informed. It's been really effective also because they see things that we don't see. So we don't know everything that's going on across the firm or the regulatory landscape. So having them be part of the conversation instead of just a recipient of information has proven really effective.
Thank you very much, April. Can I ask for your perspective on that too, Amy, from the point of view of the kind of issues clients come to you with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Involving compliance early stage is so important. I think the other thing to say is that compliance will consider risks not as a result necessarily of the technology that you're looking to bring in, but in relation to the operation as a result of introducing the technology. So there's very often some disruption to the workflows. If you're bringing in a piece of tech, while people get up to speed with it, they understand how it works. If you take it, I suppose something that most firms will be familiar with, replacing a case or matter management system, for example, will bring with it some disruption. And compliance can be there, mindful of that and anticipating what the issues will be. So, for example, I've seen a number of examples of firms who have brought in new systems, especially in case management, that have taken longer to embed than they expected. People have not been, it's been hard to get adoption of them because people are used to what they're used to. And so getting them to embrace a new technology can sometimes be a challenge. The net of that is productivity can drop. And if that's not factored into invoicing, billing targets, things like that, that actually can bring quite a lot of pressure to bear on the people that are trying to work with this system. They don't feel they can do so as efficiently as they were before, leads to people a huge amount of risk issues that we're very familiar with at the moment, I think, working longer hours, feeling quite pressured to get work done. And so I think it's from a compliance perspective, we're not only thinking, as April's quite rightly said, what do we need to think about in terms of embedding this technology, but also in terms of what other problems is this going to bring? And, there's that old adage, isn't there? Like, think how long it's going to take and then times it by 2. And then that's what we'll put in the budget. I think so really, it's a bigger question about, the cost benefit analysis of introducing tech. But if we don't involve compliance, then people might not anticipate those issues. And I have seen some firms really feel the kind of the impact of not having planned for that risk, not having that on the risk register, and reacting to it accordingly.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to ask Shaq also to comment next.
I think from what I've seen in the landscape, and I think what April and Clifford Chance have got is a great model, because it facilitates innovation. And I've worked with a number of startups that have gone into law firms where they're really excited about an innovation delivery and an automation project, and it's fallen over because the maturity internally of a change management function, of a governance function, doesn't exist. And where they've had the success is where there's been an in-house innovation team, or there's been that governor internally that glues all the parts together and brings everyone to the table, because otherwise it is a challenge. And I suppose the other point to mention is it's not one shoe, fits all. We've got to bear in mind the larger firms have the ability to have the dedicated resources and the dedicated functions, but the small to medium-sized firms, when it comes to technology and innovation, they don't always get the top-down, participation. I mean, if you look at some of the, IT has always been seen as a must-have, but not a nice-to-have function. And I think, it used to be like this, 20 years ago in banking and finance, where you'd only interact with IT if your computer crashes. And over the years, it's become more critical, because suddenly the traders realize they can't execute transactions without technology. And I think that's the perception still in the legal industry, that technology is still a support function. They need to understand that innovation and technology impacts all critical functions, and it's overarching, it spans everything. And for the smaller law firms, how do they innovate and develop? They don't have the ability to set up the innovation labs. They don't have the ability to dedicate an in-house innovation team. So I think the message there is collaboration. The larger firms and the larger banks have realized recently that they've got to collaborate on some of the key innovation projects, and the FCA is kind of mandated part of this. And I think that probably needs to come from some push or some blessing or endorsement from a regulator, I suppose, Tracy. That's an angle. But yes, I suppose don't panic in terms of, you've got to basically, it's got to be a top-down approach, but also a bottom-up. Individually build your innovation playbooks, build your own strategy, and then work it upstream and get your board or your steerco or your stakeholders involved, and you will get there. And you're not falling behind, because we're still in the infancy of this space, and you'll see some of the figures that we talk about. So don't panic there.
So can I go back with another question then? So we're all saying can be a bit scary. We've got to collaborate. Is there an issue around sort of just demystifying and upskilling people as well? And how best do you think the SRA might do that? Or what role do you all think there is for the regulator in facilitating innovation? If I could come to you first, Talia. And because obviously you've been very innovative, you're proof that people can do a virtual model. Why did you do that? You're just on mute.
I think primarily we were looking at it from a sort of efficiency point of view and a client service point of view. And that was what was driving us to look at the technology, and sort of as a secondary, we looked at it at how it could help us with our compliance function and how, the benefits of compliance. So we are kind of still able to do everything that everybody else does in their accounts function, etc., but we just do it in a very immediate way, directly through our own practice management systems, etc. And we've made sure that the system's set up so that they're very accessible by the fee earners. And I understand that it's much easier in a very small organisation like ours, where you don't have an extremely big wheel to turn. But I do think once you can get that initial buy-in from people, if it doesn't seem to be too overcomplicated what they're doing, and people understand, how easy it can be, then everybody can buy into sort of doing it. Because at the end of the day, if you have to give a piece of paper to a different team who has to action something, and then you're waiting for that, and as opposed to a system where you do it yourself and it's done as a fee earner, that can become quite intoxicating.
I've got a very particular question that someone's just raised from the floor for you, Talia, which is around the management of the client account and how you approach that, and whether there were any particular issues around that.
So my experience was that some of the practice management systems incorporate effectively an accounting function within them, which handles both the office and the client account within the practice management system. So we obviously have our client account set up with our bank, which is linked to our accounting system, which is linked to our practice management system. So we still put all of the information into our practice management system about everything we do with the client account. And actually, from a compliance point of view, I think that's been really successful, because there is a sort of a monitor there on everything that you do. For instance, you can't delete, you can't undo something. If you change something within the client account, it's there, the record of what has happened, how you can obviously reverse things, but it will show. So anybody looking at that system can see exactly what has happened. There's no kind of hiding anything that you've done. So in some ways, from a compliance point of view, it makes that quite a sort of immediate you to the system to you kind of approach.
So that transparency is actually a benefit.
Absolutely, yeah. And from a monitoring point of view, it's all there. You can monitor it, you can pull reports, etc., etc. And anybody, any of your management team can go in and look at any of that information in the immediacy. So you don't have to go and ask accounts to look at that, or any of that. It's very immediate.
Thank you, because that was, as I say, a particular question that just came in on the floor. Amy, if I may, I want to come back to you. So things like the pandemic, we've all identified it, kind of was that phrase about, necessity facilitating new innovation. Do you still find that a lot of people are just mystified by technology, and once you get over that barrier, they become avid supporters? Or how do you go through that journey with them? Well, how do you reassure at the start and get them to have the confidence?
Oh, well, I think COVID has had a massive impact on the acceleration of adoption of technology within law firms. I, until COVID, did all of my work face-to-face with law firms, and now I do all of my work like this. We don't travel anywhere anymore. And whilst we at Teal Compliance are a kind of home-based business and always have been, our clients haven't. And I think it's really impressive, whilst not surprising, that people have adopted technology as they have. It's impressive in that hitherto it's been quite difficult to gain any traction with adoption of technology in the sector until it's become need-based. But certainly it is need-based to make sure we can continue having a business. But also at the same time, I'm not massively surprised about it, because I think that one of the things that I recognise is that in our day-to-day lives, outside of our law firm jobs, we use technology all the time, and we use very sophisticated technology all the time. And so if we're coming across solutions at work that look and feel like other solutions that we might have, in conveyancing, for example, ordering searches, you order things off Amazon all day long. Tick a box, tell you what you want. It's not a different. We're not scared of using technology because we do it all the time. And I think one of the remarkable things is that sometimes some of the ways that we do deliver legal services seem very far away from the way that we use tech in other places. And I think, given that I look at things through improving the client journey, as well as making sure that we are compliant, it's about matching those expectations. And I've said for a really long time, consumers, clients, they do have this expectation of how easy it should be to interact with somebody using technology. We don't book holidays and travel agents, etc. And sometimes the way we experience legal services, onboarding, for example, where we're still getting a big pile of paper to look at and digest, just feels out of step than I don't know, buying a brand new car or something. So, I think, as I say, in one sense, I don't know if it needs demystifying, because we do use tech a huge amount in our day-to-day lives. But I do think that something, going back to something that Shaq said about the adoption and that sponsorship of it throughout the business. And I work with all sizes of law firms, big firms, little firms, medium-sized firms, and a common feature of the success of adoption of tech is, as Shaq says, the kind of leadership backing of it, because frankly they have to pay for it. There's no two ways about it in a law firm, and so they do have to be behind it. But just a thing that I came across last week, I was talking to a vendor of tech solutions, a consultant actually, no particular tech solution, and one of the things that he said to me really stayed with me, which is sometimes one of the problems we have is that we see a shiny piece of tech and think it can do everything. I was trying to speak to him and say, what do you do for my clients when you do this consultancy? And again, Shaq mentioned it. It's about having a very clear strategy around technology. What do we want it to do for us? And then go from there. Because I do think sometimes people buy technology that sounds amazing because they had a great salesperson, and not necessarily because it does everything they need it to do. And I think from what Talia is saying, I think that's probably the experience that she went through in finding the right solution for her when she was setting up her firm. Because, of course, a salesman will tell you it does everything, but no system does the same as anyone else's system. There'd be no competitive difference, would there? So it's really about tying that to strategy, I think, is the first place to start. And if that strategy is, we need to be able to deliver our service in a way that matches our clients' expectations, how do we get there? Then that's a good place to start for me.
So I just got a very interesting follow-up on that, because we've got a really good question from Steve Smith in the forum, and he was saying, that's great, and we all agreed COVID's made big step forward, but how do we ensure that progress keeps up and that people don't retreat back to normal, into their comfort zone? So, what's each of you, if you give me your top tip for how we go forward now from where we are, what would it be, or what piece of advice would you give people back in their organizations to stop progress going backwards, and then make sure we keep going? So Shaq, what would you advise Steve to do?
I think Amy just touched upon it at the very end there in terms of strategy, right? Whilst you've got everyone's attention, everyone's online, we're in virtual collaboration, virtual sprint, I would ensure that you embed a clear technology strategy within your overarching firm strategy. And look, it's one of those words, right? When you talk strategy, how long's a piece of string? So the focus here is get some quick wins in under your belt. And if you look at your existing technology stack, and Amy mentioned this as well, you can probably automate or innovate and even renovate, right? Let's be honest, when we're going online with Zoom, it's not all about innovation. We're just renovating existing processes, right? It's an online meeting. So get a plan, get a strategy, get some stakeholders behind you, and get a quick win. And here's a really big tip. So those of you that have got an enterprise license from Microsoft, and I've only come across this over the last 3 to 4 months, there's a tool called Compliance Manager, which not many people know about, and it can help you embed data protection within your firms using templates and automation. And it was mind-blowing when I saw the tool, because it's there, it's free. So take that tip and do some digging and look at that tool, because it is quite powerful.
Thanks, Shaq. Talia, coming to you, what would you do to make sure that we don't go backwards rather than forwards from here?
I think my experience when I was in the larger firms was that legal tech seemed to be this really big, complicated thing, as a fee earner, and I would have it imposed on me, and somebody came to train me, and I remembered the training for all of about 10 minutes and then couldn't remember what to do. But from my experience in sort of setting up, I had some knowledge beforehand, but I just had to kind of dive in. And for me, the key was keeping it simple, not overcomplicating the technology. I think Amy touched on it, thinking about what it is you want it to do, and then finding the most simple route to doing that, and not overcomplicating that process. And then when fee earners, again, see how much easier it is to do something on their desktop rather than involving a third party, having, somebody else in the office to having to do something, etc., they will want to do it, because, you know, as Amy says, ordering something online or whatever takes 2 minutes. Well, me putting something, you know, recording money going in and out of client account is as simple as that. Or ordering a search. I go to my practice management system. I can automatically order a title or etc. So the buy-in comes from people's experience of their life, their own life being easier. And I think there are products out there which really can make you know, processes so simple that you want to do them and you would never go back to the sort of old way, if you like.
Thanks for that, Talia. I just want your answer to that one as well, April, and then I'm going to come around to some questions around training and how you make sure people really are adopting it. But April, what do you think about this point about continued progress?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's the school of thought that innovation is either incremental or transformative. And I would say that the pandemic has definitely progressed us incrementally. And I'm going to come at this from a law firm perspective and the challenges that we face. We've seen in COVID a significant increase in adoption of existing technology. That is true. But the challenges in the first place were a little bit about demystifying what it does, but it was also largely the people that we serve. So there was definitely a feeling on behalf of the lawyers that they are serving clients and they don't want to introduce a step or a process or a technology that affects the quality of the work that they're able to deliver. And clients themselves were creating challenges by saying, well, does it meet this standard? And then another client would say, well, does it meet this standard? And there was no consistency, sort of what standard does it need to meet? Which just sort of said to, like, lawyers were like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to jeopardize my relationship or the quality of the work that I deliver. Now it's really clear that actually these tools can facilitate a better client experience. And so in order to encourage the ongoing adoption of technology and improve ways of working, it's really got to be about the clients. And so how are you using that technology to improve their experience in a way that makes a significant difference? Everything that we do will be driven by client demand. We just have to be in a position to respond to that effectively.
Yeah, thank you so much, April. Thank you. So we've had a number of questions. I'm going to start with Shaq, maybe your observations on this. Training and helping people adopt the technology. What's the start point? How do you make sure that it's not just theory, actually people are getting upskilled?
So I think the view is that, and look, it's a fact that adoption is being prevented from the more disruptive tech because of the lack of awareness and understanding of what it actually does, right? We've seen the Idiot's Guide to Legal Tech or Reg Tech for a number of years now. And, you know, we've been delivering training in this space and it's been like a virtual kind of Groundhog Day where people are not getting out of the essentials view. It's always introductory. So, I mean, not to be plugging a product here, but the view is that practical training is how you move forward. The users have to learn how to use technology, and whether that's through simulated use cases of using machine learning or natural language processing, whether that's coding your own smart contract, building your own token, creating an innovation strategy, a law tech strategy, and then bringing that to life. It's got to be hands-on experience. Without that, we will never cross that line. You know, the law schools are doing a great job, right, in terms of the theory. We don't argue with that. There's a number of legal tech firms. You know, we looked at the Law Society report from last year, and there was almost 80% that are desperate for data analytics training, which is a fascinating finding because, you know, predictive analytics, data analytics is underpinning a lot of the use cases that we're seeing in the industry today. But people are still not familiar with how it can benefit them because they've not seen enough wins in the industry. I mean, you don't get, so that's how we bridge that gap. And the way to do it is, you know, get the right programs. And, you know, we're part of a program at the moment, which is global, where we are literally chucking people into saying, okay, here's a contract, automate it. You'll be judged on how successful you are in automating this contract. If we're talking about a compliance manager, embed a data protection strategy within it. So you can go tomorrow back to the office and you can apply that. You can add an immediate value, showing people that actually Microsoft 365 or using Microsoft Word, you can implement e-discovery and other automation. You don't have to spend thousands by going to market and buying tools. So that's it. If one thing that everyone was going to take away is practical skills. you've got to get hands on, otherwise it will never we'll never win. We'll be in this Groundhog Day for another 5 years.
Thanks, Sheikh. I've got a question stimulated, I think, by that one from Sean. And he says he sees the benefits of automating case management system and is a real advocate, but he still finds a lot of resistance. How do you change mindsets? So again, Amy, do you want to have a go at that one? How do you get people to not have 120 reasons why not and one question why, to just go with it?
It's almost as if I knew you were going to ask me that question, which I didn't, incidentally. Because
Sean just raised it.
I wrote down horses to water. You know, I think this is the $64,000 question, and something that I spend a lot of time working on. Compliance that works. Basically, if you're introducing new technology, you need people to use it. You need people to comply with it. And how do you get compliance that works? I think there's two aspects to that are often overlooked. The first one is, I think Shaq's completely right, the practical knowledge of how it works and what it does. So looking at one of our tools, for example, that we have in our tech company, it anticipates the inquiries that a solicitor will raise on the conveyancing journey, and it anticipates them at the very early stage, so basically at the point of marketing a property. And it's in terms of asking a lawyer to use it, they've got to have the confidence that it is looking at the same questions they would look at, and that they don't have to double do the work. So that they have to practically see how it works and understand how it works, so they can get comfortable with it and rely on it, and there's some data around that, how that works. The second thing that I think we just really need to be conscious of is understanding why people don't want to comply, because it's not as simple as it's too hard, they don't understand how it works. It's actually sometimes more basic reasons or more underlying reasons that are nothing to do with the actual technology itself, but are to do with that person and their perception of what their role is. So a few years ago now, a technology startup approached me. They were trying to sell something into law firms, and they had great adoption of it by barristers, but law firms didn't seem that interested in it at the time. That has changed, in fairness, but the whole aim of this technology was to save clients billing. It was to reduce the fee for clients, was the whole point of the technology. It was developed by a client who had a massive bill for repeat work for preparing trial bundles, basically. And so it was about pagination and something that saved money. And you've got to think about what, to a fee earner, a lawyer who's given a tool that reduces their billing by 30%, not going to be massive fans of it unless they've got something to replace that 30%. So it's sometimes looking at the underlying reasons why they don't want to do things, rather than it being anything to do with the product or the technology itself. It's about how we reward people, how we measure their success, and how we incentivize them. And in terms of compliance that works, I do often recommend that we start to think about incentivizing the use of tech and compliance, rather than just the stick method of enforcement. Try a carrot instead.
So that's a nice point. No, less stick and more carrot. Can I ask though? I'm very interested in whether other jurisdictions internationally have got this right. And I was going to ask you, April, whether that you do think that there are lessons we can learn from other jurisdictions, or are we all kind of at the same level on this journey? And actually, again, it's back to this point about we're doing it real time. But what do you think?
I have, worked in a number of jurisdictions, and I would say that we're all roughly the same. Some are slightly further ahead than others, but it does come down to the model of the law firm and how we are incentivized to work. And I think it's a cultural shift, and that there is sort of a change management element around it. But I also think it's really important, regardless of what jurisdiction you're in, is to consistently put yourself in the client's shoes, and encouraging our people that we're trying to get adopting the technology to do that, and focus less on the tech and more on the problem to be solved or the job to be done. And that can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and certainly it varies from practice to practice. So conveyancing to debt capital finance, it varies, and you have to be really careful and consider the journey of the individual when you're asking them to adopt that tech. And it's the context every time, regardless of what jurisdiction you're in. You just have to look at the person and why they are saying no. So I thought that was a really good point that Amy made.
We also had an awful lot of questions around how do you know when it's done? Isn't one of the things about tech that even if you have a brilliant strategy, there's always something coming else, and you know, is it good to try things as long as you fail quickly and learn from it, or you know, because you're doing an investment, do you feel you have to make it work? I'd be really interested in your views, Talia. You know, just what's the right balance?
Yeah, I mean, the reason it's quite an interesting one, this, because me saying, you know, there were teething problems in the first 6 months. One of those was that we picked a practice management system that we pretty quickly realised wasn't for us, and changing it was going to be really difficult, but because we'd already put loads of data into it. But I think we had to be brave and take a decision quickly to do that. So there are times when you definitely do have to be brave and take difficult decisions, I think, around technology, and move away from something that isn't working for you and make that decision quickly before it gets embedded and the wheel is so difficult to turn back. So, yeah, I think it's a difficult one. And with regards to the question of sort of keeping abreast of things, I think once you start dipping your toe in the water, it becomes pretty difficult not to get right in there and have a good old swim, because more things you sort of find that you can bolt on and find ways of doing things. Once you're in that mindset and your fee earners are bought into the idea of embracing legal tech, I think there's always things coming along. And the clever thing is just to, as Amy said earlier, not to be sort of distracted by the shiny things, but keep it focused on what it needs to do for you, how you can keep things as streamlined as possible while still achieving those sort of goals. And always, for us, it's about efficiency, compliance, you know, keeping things lean, keeping things streamlined, because that's what we've found really, really works well.
Thanks, Talia. April, what about from a very bigger firm, global perspective?
Yeah, I think I would say it's generally the same. There are certain jurisdictions which I know will always be a little bit easier, and they do tend to just adopt things faster. And again, that comes down to some pressures that they face that other jurisdictions don't face. And it comes down to the model. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all. We do try to fail quickly, but in some regions, maybe we fail quicker than in others. You know, just acknowledging that there are different pressures in some regions. But I'm quite fortunate to be able to have that freedom to sort of try and fail quickly. Because as Talia said, you know, once you start onboarding something, you start running all kinds of new risks. You create new risks when you try to move off of said thing. So, you know, small pilots, I'm a big believer in prototypes. You know, just take a really small sample size, try that out before you start integrating things, putting client data in it, do it as quickly as possible, reach conclusion as quickly as possible, and acknowledge that your success will always be iterative. Big bangs are not effective ever, I would say, in my opinion, and that you just need, it always is a journey. It comes back to the journey of the client, the journey of the team implementing it, and the journey of the firm along their strategic roadmap that they've set for themselves.
I'm conscious of time, but I would like both Amy and Shaq's views on that particular question. So Amy first, and then I'll come to you, Shaq.
Oh, I completely agree. Sometimes you do have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes do a U-turn on what you've put in. Talia's experience is not the only one I've heard of people putting practice management systems and then realising it's just not for them. And the more it goes on, the more painful it is. Obviously, part of that is to do with whether you can get out the contract. Would be definitely part of that consideration, rather than just whether the tech works for you or not. And it's interesting because I had a firm ask me exactly that question a couple of weeks ago, thinking about their anti-money laundering onboarding process and changing part of that. And they were asking me, what do firms do? And I think it is a challenge when you've got a system that is operated in all of the departments in the firm quite often, and is relied upon by all of the departments in the firm. So if you start just doing one department at a time, that can cause you some quite considerable issues. You're probably running 2 systems at once for a little while you're doing the testing, rather than switching one off and doing a big bang. But a big bang, you know, somebody, if there's something wrong with that system and you big bang and you've got hundreds of lawyers all relying on it, that's no work being opened, because they can't do it unless they've done the CDD until they figure out how to use the system. So that's all in the planning, I think, and the risk, the balancing the risks of how quickly or otherwise you deploy it. I mean, that is the bane of
everyone. Shaq, finally from you, what's your answer on that one?
Look, I think April said it right. You've got to remain agile. You've got to remain fluid. One of the things that we've seen in the industry is we're disrupting our own business processes and firms, but the technology firms that are selling you the tech, they're not disrupting their sales model. So as opposed to a lengthy pre-sales and take this and that's it, you're on your own, they should be pushed into a position where they are articulating the value proposition to you. They partner with you in a use case. They help you realize some of the benefits and quick wins. And then you've got your backing, you're going into a partnership as opposed to, sell and forget, because, vendors and tech firms are a challenge, especially when we're looking at a lot of disruptive firms, because they've not got the back end like the larger tech firms in terms of support and service level agreement. So that's the challenge, without a doubt. And I think internally, understand your existing landscape. Back in the day, I was part of the ABN and RBS merger, and we were looking at, and once they'd taken over the big old beast, we tried to do a divestment. And when we looked at some of these divestments, we mapped out a lot of the existing landscape and re-engineered that to a target landscape before we embedded technology within it. So currently what happens often is, you have people embedding technology and then trying to shoehorn an operating model around technology. It's got to be the other way around. You have to look at what you're doing, and that's where you're going to win. Otherwise, any type of tech, you will struggle.
Well, look, that's a great segue into what I might want to say in just the last 5 minutes about the role of the SRA. So we have just published, as I say, our new corporate strategy for the next 3 years. We are very conscious that through SRA Innovate, we probably could do a lot more to really help people come to us early, to test propositions with us, to explain to us what they want to do, and for us to give them a view about whether that's going to meet the ethics requirements or it's going to deal with things. So I wanted to just put a call out that please do get in touch with us. We are not as developed as, say, the FCA are in terms of how many people approach them with innovative ideas, but through SRA Innovate, which we're looking to relaunch to be more user-friendly, I really do encourage people to start coming and talking to us so that you don't go down the wrong route or have to have stranded assets or investment that doesn't pay back. So I just wanted to make that shout out. We are really up for doing that. I'm very, very interested with different people's ideas. We've got literally 3 minutes left, but and I just want to say massive thank you to the panel. I think it's been fascinating. I've made loads of notes, and as I say, we're going to make sure that the tape recording is available, so that's good. I want to remind everybody to fill out the evaluation of this process if you've been watching online. I noticed from the figures a lot of people have watched throughout, so that's very good, and we'd be really interested in your feedback. But if I may, in the last 3 minutes, could I just do the slow death round to each panelist and just say, if you were in the SRA, what one thing do you think we should do to help all of you? So start with you, Amy.
So one of the best quotes I had ever had from someone in the SRA is, some of our best work you might not hear about. Now, it wasn't in technology, to be fair, but I do think more information coming out of the SRA of the types of things that they are seeing and are approving of and do think work would give much more comfort to people who are exploring these things, because without that reassurance, I think people do worry that if they get something wrong, that they'll, feel the pain for it later on. So you're obviously getting involved in lots of these things for, looking at innovative ways of doing things and sharing that information that you see, I think would be the most helpful thing.
So actually regularly doing that sharing would be a good thing. I'll make a note of that. I'm going to come to April now. Your top tip for us?
To the extent that you can help facilitate the development of a common set of standards or a framework or a baseline for both technology providers to know that they have to comply with, but also for clients and law firms to understand what that is so that we don't end up in that sort of debate. Any guidance you can share on that would be really helpful.
A couple of comments came up today where we'll be able to follow up on exactly things like that clarity. Talia, from you, your top tip for us?
I'm going to echo what everybody said, really. I had kind of the SRA's standards here and a salesman here, and I felt very much in the middle. So what I'd quite like is for law firms to almost drop a bit back out of that conversation, for the SRA to get involved in making sure suppliers understand what it is that solicitors have to do and what they have to comply with, so that those two things, the two markets come together a bit more, I think.
A bit more seamlessly, yeah. Thank you. Shaq, finally, over to you.
I would go one step further and say the SRA has to mandate certain technology. If you take the PRA and the FCA, they only really made progress when they looked at the banks and they looked at critical systems, and they actually mandated technology investment, technology upgrades, because they were critical tools. So we're in a £40 billion market, legal services market here. We can no longer think that this is not as real time or won't cause as much damage. We have to look at what tools people are using, what algorithms people are going to be using as high frequency trading and decision making and predictive analytics. There's going to be so many nuances and questions and challenges that are coming up. You've got to establish a baseline. And I think that's one of the things. And just on that, before, I know we're almost done, just mentioning the research piece that we're kicking off with the SRA, and the challenge there is to understand what you as law firms, as corps and coffers are doing, what your challenges are, and hopefully we can help bring that back to the SRA and say, actually, we can automate this process and help innovate. So, but look, Tracy, I think the Innovate view is fantastic, and glad to be part of this discussion and what you're doing. Hopefully there's a lot of change to come.
Yep, I think that's very clear. I just want to say a big thank you everyone who's joined us today, big for their questions, but most of all to the panelists. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.